Go. Hi, everybody.
Hi, guys.
I mean, we're making another video together because we know that you really like it when we do that.
You're
And we
welcome.
also like it when, yes, you are welcome. We also like it when we do it because we get to hang out, even if it's for nerdy reasons.
We may or may not hang out a little more than we probably should.
But
It's always for you guys. Just kidding. It's really fun.
It's true. It's very true. Oh,
So in this video, we are going to be giving you all the information you need to be successful on this literature review. Remember, literature review 1 is worth 25% of your overall grade in this class. It's what you've worked so hard to build up to. This is the end goal, right? Of all these summaries and all these sources and these graphic organizers is to get to this place. So you are here.
So this video, obviously, since this is a big old fat mama assignment, right? Like, there's going to be a lot of information in this lesson video. So you're probably going to need to watch it more than once, and nobody is better than watching it just once, right? Everybody should watch this multiple times. You should have it on in the background while you're like driving or, washing your hair, or like while you're writing your literature review. I'm just saying.
So the basics of this literature review is that it should be 6 to 8 pages in length, and that doesn't include the works cited page, because you need to stay within this page length. You shouldn't be going over, you really shouldn't be going under. Stay within those page lengths. It's guided by that question that we've talked about over and over again. Are superhero movies a positive, negative effect on American society? You want to have that, you're going to have an overview of that conversation, which you've been working on this whole time in your summaries. We need to make sure what conversation are all of these authors going to be a part of before you start talking about their opinions and their reasons why they believe that. As everything else, it needs to be written in a formal academic style, no bias at all. You should have a meticulously well-written MLA works cited page as well as in-text citations. Editing it through multiple lenses, which we'll talk about later on, what you should do for that. And of course, just being free of your grammar style and formatting errors.
Alrighty, so your first step, we've organized this lesson into steps that you should follow, and you should definitely do these steps in order. And we will give you chances in class to work on these, chances in class to peer review after certain steps. But keep in mind that the reason that we're putting steps here is because we know what order is going to help you be the most successful. So don't try to skip steps. Don't try to skip the graphic organizer. Don't try to do any of that, because we've done this before and we know how to help you be successful. So the first thing you're going to do is compile your works cited page. And you're just basically, you've been making those citations all along in your summaries. So you're going to copy and paste those citations into one big fat Jigo works cited page that should have 6 sources on it. And those sources should be organized in alphabetical order by the author's, the first letter in the author's name. Again, you got to look at the formatting of the page, make sure every comma, space, period, question mark, everything is meticulously formatted, including those frickin' hanging indents that just drive everybody crazy, but are necessary.
Okay, for step 2, we are going to have you guys start writing your heading. So you should never start a paper off with your introduction and your conclusion. You got to get the meat of your paper. You got to figure out what you're going to be writing first. So we break it up into 3 different headings, but first we want you to create your heading number 1 and heading number 2. So your topic, your sources are going to be able to be put into 3 distinct subtopics. So they're all still answering the same overall question, but they're all in specific headings. So you're going to have 2 sources in each heading. Heading number 1, we did this together. This is the shared topic, where you're going to be discussing sources 1 and 2 and in terms of how they connect to each other and comparing and contrasting. Our heading number 2 is violence and militarization, and you're going to discuss sources 3 and 4 and how they connect. So we've already given you your heading 1. You're going to call it the necessity of shared stories, and that's where you're going to be talking about those 2 sources. And then heading number 2, you're going to call violence and militarization and talk about those 2 sources.
And then for your third heading, this is the part where we all branched off into our own choices, right? Trying to give you a little choice and voice in this whole situation. And this is the part where for sources 5 and 6, you have chosen either the race angle, the political and socio-political angle, the tech, science, and education angle, or the female representation and gender angle is kind of those 4 sources there in the last option. I've separated them into 2 separate ones, but if you have, whatever 2 sources you've chosen from those 4 options under representation and gender, whichever one you chose, that's going to be your source 5 and 6, and this is going to become the name of that 3rd heading. So in the 3rd heading, you're going to discuss whatever the sources you chose for sources 5 and 6. That's going to be the place where you compare and contrast those 2 sources.
Okay, so step 3 is to organize your sources. So you have collected 6 sources and you have been working on a graphic organizer for all of them and summarize them. But at this point, we're going to have you organizing your sources into how they relate to each other. So thinking about your headings, you're going to like outline the nuances, the differences in perspective within each heading. Choose an order in which each source is going to be introduced and connected under each heading. So, I mean, so much of this work you guys have already done with your summaries. So you're basically just going to find out how you're going to organize these sources under each heading.
And you also, just because source number 1 and source number 2 were given to you in that order, it doesn't mean under that first heading, you need to talk about source 1 first and source 2 second. You can introduce whichever one you want first in order to make the information flow more smoothly. So keep in mind, you don't have to keep it in the order that we gave it to you, but you do need to keep those sources under the headings that we've already outlined for you. And then next, we have basically, if you think specifically about each of these little headings, each of these 3 headings should be their own paper. And it should be an own little encapsulated paper that you could turn in on its own, right? But you're kind of combining 3 mini papers into one big fat paper and then creating an overall introduction and conclusion for those 3 mini papers. So each of your headings, it's easier to create those if you think about each of those 3 headings as a little mini paper. And surprise, surprise, we've already written similar papers to this in each of your summaries. It's just that that connection paragraph is now going to be basically the whole paper after you give a little introduction of what each source is. So think about each heading as being its own paper. And that means that it should have its own mini introduction, including a little mini thesis about that overall heading, just the information within that heading. Then it should discuss each source in that heading separately, like give me a little mini summary of each of the sources, and then spend the bulk of your time within each heading comparing and contrasting those 2 sources in that heading. What's similar about the ideas in those sources? What's different about the ideas in those sources? And you got to be specific. You can't say that they connect or that they contrast. You got to say how they connect and how they contrast. And make sure that you're endeavoring to represent all sides of this little mini conversation within your heading. And then your heading is going to have its own little conclusion as well. And we'll get into details about the difference between a heading conclusion and a whole paper conclusion as we move forward in this little lesson. So we'll hold on to that thought.
And remember, when you are doing your headings, you're not simply just taking the summary that you've written on source 1 and source 2 and somehow inserting a summary on source 1 and then a summary on source 2 and having this little mini and they connect because of this, right? It's not going to look like that. The whole purpose of creating these headings is so that now you can talk about these sources as if they were in conversation with each other. So be careful that you're not just oh, so I just basically need to put in a summary for 1 and 2 and then have a little connection between them. The connection is the piece that we're looking for. So that's the major part of it.
The summaries of each of the sources are just the setup for the bulk of your attention should be on how those sources connect. And it's really important here that I remind you, you're not allowed to take writing from your summaries and just plug it into your literature review. You cannot be plagiarizing.
Absolutely not.
You gotta
that would be considered self-plagiarism, guys.
Yeah. We will talk about the details of that later, but keep in mind, you have to be rephrasing and recontextualizing all the information you used in your summaries into this literature review. No copy paste, except for the works cited citations, which is a whole separate thing.
Yes, absolutely. Copy and paste those. You've already done all that. Okay, so first you're going to write heading number 1. So you're gonna write your overall introduction and end with like an overall conclusion. So, so to write the body of your heading, think about like each one, we kind of just covered this. Each one is a mini lit review, make a clear thesis, introduction, and wrap up for each heading. Sometimes students forget to do their little mini introductions and their mini conclusions in each one of their headings, and it certainly impacts those grades in that particular part of the rubric. So like Ms. Hernandez has said, you need to make sure that each one of these headings can almost stand by themselves. You would never turn in a paper, which is the body, right? You would turn it in with that heading or with that introduction and then the body and then some type of mini conclusion. So the title of this heading is going to be The Necessity of Shared Stories. You already know which sources are going to go in there, but you're going to have to think about how can I make sure that I'm organizing these sources, that they're actually in conversation with each other in a way that flows.
And also, it's important to think even about your heading. We're writing this whole literature review, the whole Big Fat Mama. We're writing the middle of it first, right? That's best practice. But even within each little heading, we're still writing the middle of each heading first before we write the little introduction for the heading and the little conclusion for the heading. Starting with the body will always help you ensure that your overall introduction for that heading or the big paper perfectly encapsulates what was in that body. So be careful about not trying to conquer the introduction before you write the body. But then think specifically about the conclusion for your heading is different than a conclusion for the whole paper. So the difference between the conclusion for the heading is that the conclusion for your heading is literally just wrapping up or summarizing the bigger and more nuanced connections that you talked about within the heading. So your wrap up should be a paragraph kind of summarizing for the reader everything that happened within that heading before you move on. In the wrap ups for the headings, you do not have to make a so what, who cares, big picture for that heading, but a big picture for that heading might be a good idea. You just don't have to follow the same protocols as we do for a Big Fat Mama conclusion, because we'll get to that part later. So don't think that your wrap up for your heading has to cover all of the so what, who cares. Just make sure it covers the so what, who cares of just that heading. And then after you write heading number 1, you just follow that exact same process, writing that little mini paper, starting from the middle, then doing the introduction, then doing that wrap up conclusion. You're writing heading number 2 just as its own little paper. And the same exact process for heading number 3, just as its own paper, except for heading number 3 is going to be the heading that you chose. So you'll have a little less guidance for that. You have to be a little more careful when you write that because we've all branched off into individual topics. So as you introduced, discussed, and then concluded each little heading, now is the time where we zoom out.
And you're going to write your overall introduction. So think too, like sometimes I know it can get overwhelming for students, but if I have to write a 6 to 8 page paper, that sounds so difficult. That's so crazy. And that's why we're giving you these steps to follow. But even if these feel overwhelming, just think of each heading as like a mini paper. And your overall intro and your overall conclusion is what brings all of those things together. But you can think of them kind of individual if that helps like lessen your anxiety over writing such a big paper. So what you need to make sure that you do when you start your overall introduction is start with some type of attention getting introduction. So even though that research question should be there, it should be something that really sparks the interest of your readers to start off with. So you need to make sure that you include a clear and concise thesis statement. So a mini summary of the overall conversation. And your introduction should have a brief preview of the supporting points, the headers. So you're not elaborating far into those. You're not going to introduce any of the source article titles or any of the authors, nothing like that, but just what those headings that you have are going to be and what they're going to kind of encompass overall. So by the time your reader is reading that introduction, they should first be hooked into your topic. They should know what that research question is going to be, and they should be able to know what 3 things you're going to be talking about. So if somebody is looking to read a paper and they come across yours and you talk that in your 3rd heading, you're going to talk about, or in your first one, you're going to talk about heading 1, 2, and 3, and maybe yours is on race. And they're like, oh, that's not really what I'm looking for. I was looking for a conversation about this dealing with gender. And they'd be like, oh, this paper's not for me. And they're going to go find a different paper. So your job is to make sure by that introduction, your readers know exactly what they're getting into, if it's worth what reading, if it's worth like their time, if they're looking for a source on something else, they should be able to know that right away in your heading.
And what another important thing to know is in your summaries, we're asking you to give one context sentence, right? But in this Big Fat Mama paper, we're asking you to give a big context paragraph. Assume that your reader knows nothing about the superhero culture as it is within our country, right? Give them a little background on that. Give them an understanding of it, assuming they know nothing about it. So this is blowing up that context sentence that we taught you about in your summary and really blowing it up and making sure that the reader has a good understanding, but you're making sure you're not introducing any of the author's ideas in your introduction. You're just giving basic, unbiased information so the reader has context before they dive in to all those details. So once you write that introduction, remember you've already written the middle of this whole Big Fat Mama paper. You've written your introduction. Now it's really important that you understand one thing. If your conclusion is a teensy-tiny third of a page paragraph, you're doing it wrong. The whole idea of a literature review is leading up to a conclusion that the reader can gain information from in a way that matters to them. So here's the thing. Your whole literature review is leading up to the conclusion. If you phone in the conclusion or you give us some hot nonsense for the conclusion, you've missed the whole point of the paper. Everything that comes before the conclusion, the body of the paper, all the headings, and the introduction, all of that is literally setting the stage for your higher level thinking conclusion. So the conclusion is a little bit different than a conclusion for a summary, but you'll notice it still has a lot of the same components. Your conclusion should be unbiased. You shouldn't be making a decision in your conclusion about whether or not superhero movies are good for American society. You should give a really nice picture of the overall conversation without taking a side, without being biased. Another important part of the conclusion, you can make it its own little extra heading, or you can just make it its own paragraph separate from the Big Fat Mama conclusion. But you do need to have a full paragraph that talks about the areas of further inquiry. And the problem with this is that students still really struggle with the areas for further inquiry. What does it even mean, right? We've been asking you to do it on your graphic organizers, but some of you have been skipping it or phoning it in or misunderstanding it. So it's important, you've been collecting those little areas of further inquiry along the way. That's where all of those, this paragraph is where all of those will go. And so remember, in areas of further inquiry is basically telling the people who are reading your paper, here's what all the research I did. Here are the questions it didn't answer. Here are the things that still need to be researched. Where are these 6 sources that you found? What holes in information about this conversation are there? What have they not covered? What questions still need to be looked into? And again, when we say what questions still need to be answered, that doesn't mean actually putting questions in your paper. There should never be questions to the reader in any formal academic writing. So after you've covered your areas of further inquiry, it should be a hefty paragraph, not some hot nonsense 2 sentences, right? And then your conclusion should just summarize the paper's main points without directly restating them word for word. Just remind the reader what you did go over in your headings. Then your conclusion should always include a big fat mama, so what? A big fat mama, who cares? And make sure you're clearly telling the reader exactly who this should matter to, exactly why it should matter to those people, and then really, really zoom out and say, what is the big picture of this whole conversation? And remember, a big picture has to do with everybody. So we've talked about why the specific people care and why it matters to them, but then zoom out and really blow it up to our whole entire society. If superhero movies are good or bad for American society, what kind of society do we have if we address the bad parts of it? And what kind of society will we have if we retain the good parts of what the superhero culture gives to our society? So really talk about what kind of society we can have if we address the pitfalls and continue on with the pros of it all. Your conclusion should also bring the paper to a mic drop close. Remember, it still needs to stay unbiased. Don't take a side, but make sure when the reader puts down that paper and they finish reading that conclusion, that they care about what you're writing about and they understand why caring about it matters on a larger scale.
So with the so what, who cares, be careful that like you're not accidentally only bringing in the so what, who cares of like one side. So sometimes that's a place where students can get themselves into a little bias in their conclusion is they'll talk about the so what, who cares, and they'll pull from just a couple of the authors and you'll find that bias in there. So be careful that you are giving like both sides of the so what, who cares big picture, and you're not just giving it for one side. That happens a lot in lit reviews because in your summaries, it's easier to do because you know exactly, you're just stating this particular authors. But when you're doing this big, huge paper and you're trying to pull in all of these different voices, sometimes we have a tendency to kind of accidentally latch on to a couple ideas and have that in our conclusion. So be careful with that. For your, real quick on the areas for further inquiry as well, this is going to be something that's coming from you. This is not, everything you've done so far has been all about the author's so what, the author's who cares, the author's big picture, right? All of those come from the author. Your further inquiry though is you making this observation about these sources and saying, you know what, there was some critical information that these authors didn't talk about. And think even too, you know, you had choices between 4 different subtopics. If you chose one of them, then your lit review is lacking the conversation that deals with some of those other ones. So if you're struggling with further inquiry, just think about those ideas too, how
And
they
also,
fit into this conversation and how your lit review is not covering those ones. What else needs to be talked about? Think about the fact that we've already given you other veins, other areas that we're not talking about in this lit review, and that might help you as well in that further inquiry.
but keep in mind, even though the further inquiry is the higher level thinking part of this paper, it is the you deciding, now that you've said what's there, tell me what's not there. Even though that comes from you and your own brain, you still can't speak in first person. You cannot say I, me, my. You have to remove yourself from it and say that there are ideas that were not covered, instead
Absolutely.
of saying I think there are ideas that are not covered, right?
Yeah.
So it's all still in third person, you're totally detached from it.
It's still completely unbiased. Unbiased. Okay, you guys, we try, as you can see from this video itself, we try to give you as many resources as possible. We want you to be successful. You've worked so hard to build up to where you are, and all we're rooting for is your guys' success in this. But we've given you so much stuff to help you along the way. Now it's your job to make sure that you're using those things. Use your graphic organizer. Have your one-page outline, the student example, the due date calendar to help you time manage. I mean, sit at your table at home and you should just have papers scattered all over. You should just be covered in papers. You should have your graphic organizers, your summaries, your annotation verbs, your due date calendar, your student example, your transition words. Like, you should just be like, okay, I have it all out here. You should have your super cute MLA handbook out. And you should just recognize, like, okay, I have all these things and I'm capable of doing this now. Like, I'm prepared, I've practiced, now I just need to use the resources I've worked so hard on, and they're going to support me. And you just need to like just move forward with all of those resources.
And it's not like Mrs. Holland and I don't want to help you. We do want to help you, but we spend the time giving you these resources so you can start to take responsibility for your own learning and find your own answers in these resources. And if you come to us, we'll say, hey, did you rewatch the lesson video? Did you take a look at the student example? For questions like that, it's now that we've kind of held your hand a little bit through this graphic organizer summary process, we need you to take it one step further and use what we've given you. 99% of the questions that you have, there's answers that are already available to you. It's not that we don't want you to ask those questions, it's that we put time into giving you these resources for a reason. So please use them before you come to us. And here's the thing, remember that you have to formally introduce all of your sources in this paper, but you only need to do it once. After you've formally introduced your author, all you need to do is need to refer to them by their last name or their last name at all, or both authors' names, so-and-so and so-and-so, their last names throughout the rest of the paper. It's important to know that every time the first time you mention every source, you need to fully give the title of the source in MLA. You don't need to include the credibility or the credentials of the author in the text. You don't need to include the journal title. If you do, it's not necessarily wrong, but it's not exactly what the skills that we're working on now. We'll talk about you adding credibility later on in our annotated bib. So you don't need to stress too much about that. Just cover what we're asking you to cover and don't feel the need to add anything extra or reintroduce the articles every time you're talking about them.
Okay, you guys, as you know, when you have been peer reviewing with your summaries and you have gotten so familiar with those rubrics, and that familiarity should help you like know, okay, do I have all these things? I mean, we write those rubrics honestly for you guys so that you can ensure, yes, I have this, I have that. Same thing with this summary. You should not be this lit review, you should not be submitting anything until you have gone piece by piece by piece in this rubric and gone, yes, I have fulfilled this requirement and this requirement and this requirement. You'll get more familiar with this rubric also because we will be peer reviewing. But seriously, guys, whatever you got to do, like know this rubric, know it. You need to have those introductions. The overall introduction and heading introduction counts under this rubric score. So you'll have your overall major big paper intro and big major paper conclusion. But if you don't have those intros to the headings and the conclusions to the headings, that's going to hurt you here. So make sure that you include those. Each one of your sources, it needs to be masterfully introduced, contextualized, and summarized unbiasedly. And it needs to be evident that there's a reason you chose this source to put into your lit review. So that should be obvious as well. The connections between the sources, guys, will make up the meat of your headings, because you should be talking about them in conversation. Think about if like those two authors were sitting together and talking about their ideas, how would they be able to have a conversation back and forth about what they agree on, what they don't agree on, how they agree on certain things. Those kinds of ideas, you need to be putting it as a discussion.
And then with those connections too, another good thing to think about is you're not connecting their thesis to their other person's thesis. No. You're connecting their main points to the other person's main points, right? So you're not just talking about their overall message, you're talking about the little nuances in each of their messages and how those little nuances relate to one another. We're not just connecting the main idea to the main idea.
Especially because not all of these sources contrast entirely. I mean, a lot of them have very similar ideas. It's just that maybe some of their reasons for getting to those particular like thesis statements and things are different. And how are those related? You'll want to your organization, transition, and wrap-ups. Those wrap-ups are those heading mini wrap-ups that you have at the end. Make sure that you're using that college level transition language. Make sure that it's organized clearly. I mean, you don't want to confuse your readers by going back and forth. You want to make sure that even though you're having a conversation, we as your readers can follow that conversation very effectively. Your areas for further inquiry, like we said, you can have a heading for this at the very end of heading 3 that says for areas for further inquiry. Sometimes that helps you guys with your organization. It also helps you remember that you can't forget to put your further inquiry in there. You're going to put its very own paragraph for that. Then you're going to go to your conclusion. This is your big, huge, so what, who cares? What are the larger societal implications of this topic? Why is it so urgent? Why do we all care? If people get to the end of your paper and they're like, all right, I don't really care still, then you just haven't done your job, right? You want them to end this paper being like, wow, I didn't even really think about the fact that these like superhero movies really can be so impactful on society. And you want them to want to learn more. They should be like, I'm going to start looking into the further inquiry. I want to know more about this topic because you know what? In some capacity, either now or in the future, this will affect me. And I want to know more about it. So try to get there with them. Your writing style, no vague pronouns, annotation verbs, right? All of the All of those are your clear, concise sentences are done very, well, very, I was gonna say adequately, but we want more than adequate, right? We want
Yep.
masterful. Conventions, you guys, at this point, you should not have spelling, grammar, punctuation errors. It just really takes the credibility of your paper out. You can have the best well-written stuff, but if you just have spelling and grammar issues, your readers are going to be like, I don't really know how credible this source is. So make sure that you're doing that effectively. And then your MLA, you guys, there is zero reason your MLA works cited page especially should not just be perfect. We've done the works cited or the citations together. We've done a peer review on works cited. At this point, you should be like, at least I know 100% I'm going to get a 4 in MLA. Like, you should go in being like 4, I know it. So make sure your in-text citations, your article title formatting, all of those things, your double space, your page formatting, you're not having those big, huge, extra spacing gaps in between paragraphs and in between headings and things like that. Just make sure that all of that is done well.
All right, so here's the thing that Ms. Holland and I really have felt is super helpful for students as we've learned to teach this class and help students through it. And that's the idea that you have got to self-edit. Yes, we peer review stuff, and yes, we have checks and balances in place for you. But at the end of the day, if you're not learning how to read your papers and improve your papers on your own, this class has been useless to you, honestly. So here's the thing. It's as if we have 9 different lenses that you're looking at your paper through. And yes, that means we're literally asking you to quite literally read through your paper 9 different times for 9 different purposes. Yeah, that's how meticulous and painstaking good writers are with their writing. So first, the first thing that you should think about these different lenses, we have 9 of them. Think about these different lenses as different sunglasses, and each sunglass has a different kind of shade that you're looking through at the same paper, but you're looking for something different every time you read through that paper. So the first thing you're going to look through, you're going to put on your outline glasses, right? You go through your paper and double check that it is fulfilling and is in the same structure as the outline you've been given. I can't tell you how many times students turn in something that looks nothing like the outline, and I want to be like, hey, why did I give you the outline if you weren't even going to look at it, Half of the rubric is just there. If you follow the outline, you've done half of what we've asked you to do. Second, you put on your organization glasses. Make sure that your writing flows in an organized manner. Make sure there aren't big jumps from idea to idea. And sometimes creating a heading helps the reader to the next jump of the next idea, but you should still be introducing that heading and concluding that heading so your reader doesn't feel blindsided by new information. Then the next lens, oh goodness, we've lost count here.
Lenses, they know what we mean.
Oh no, you get it.
So
the next lens is just to look for MLA. Your works cited page should be in the bag. You shouldn't be worrying about that, but you should be citing in text each of those sources at the very minimum 2 separate times in this paper. But that's a minimum. If you're mentioning more than 2 things from that paper, then there should be 3 citations for each source, right? But a minimum of twice. Make sure that all those citations in text are formatted correctly, and not to mention the page formatting and all that other good stuff. Then, like Ms. Holland said, you're going to look through this paper ensuring that it adheres to the rubric. Have the rubric in front of you, read your paper, and double check that you have everything listed there. Literally read every literal word of the rubric. And then the next lens that you're going to talk about is just basic mechanics. Here's the problem. Studies show that people, when they go through their paper, and this will be the 5th time you've gone through your paper, sometimes you don't see the mistakes that you are making because your brain shows you what you meant and not what you read. So another good thing when you're looking for mechanics is to look at the paper in a different order than you wrote it. So your brain doesn't decide that you're seeing what you meant instead of what's actually there. So start with the last sentence and go sentence by sentence from the end and just look for awkward mechanics errors.
And we know that this seems like you're like, really 9? We have to read this 9 times. But like Ms. Hernandez says, like our brains have read this so many times that we just start to get so used to what we've read and we're like, looks good. And you totally forget to see. I mean, think about those of you who've written your summaries and you're like, oh my gosh, I thought I looked for all of the me. or all of the hour, and I
All the
missed that one.
contractions.
And that's just one page. Like, think about in this big paper, if you're just, you know, going through it and going through it, and you're looking for all these things at once, like, we guarantee you're going to miss them. But if you're looking through them going, okay, I'm doing lens 6, I'm looking for clear and concise, I'm not looking for anything else, I'm not looking at thesis, I'm not looking at works cited, I'm just reading and going, was that wordy? Was that unnecessary? Do I have too many prepositions? And then when you're going through with formality, you're just going through and being like, all I'm looking for are contractions, first and second person. That's it. And your brain will start to know, like, okay, this is all I'm looking for. The other thing you can do, guys, especially if you're like, you know what word I use all the time is hour. Then go into your paper and click Control F and write the word hour and see if your paper has any of them. And sometimes you'll be surprised. You're like, oh my gosh, I thought I got them all, but there's one. So you can do that in your document. Just click that Control F, try to find some of those. If you have anybody who can read this for you, please ask them to read it for you. Sometimes just having somebody read it out loud to you can be really beneficial. So you can either have someone read through it, or you can just ask them, hey, can you read through this out loud to me? Because once you hear other people read it out loud, you're like, wait, that's what I wrote? That's not what I meant. Or that sounded super confusing. Highlight that for me so I know I need to go back there and fix it. If you don't have anyone to read this out loud for you, then read it out loud yourself and try to catch yourself. If you're stumbling on your words, or if you're like, wait, what? And you have to go back, then you know you've made something there, highlight it and keep going. But honestly, you guys, these self-editing lenses are so important, especially like thinking through that rubric, because you need to make sure, especially if you want to do revisions for this lit review, that you have all the components. If you're missing major components of this, that can affect you with your revision. So make sure that you have all the things that you need to have the first time you submit this.
All right, and we're going to give you a calendar to work through this incrementally. We'll do heading number 1 and 2, and then peer review it. We'll do the next part of the paper and then peer review it. So we have checks and balances in place. So please don't think about the calendar and the due date calendar as some sort of oppression, right? I mean, I get it. You're allowed to think about it in a little bit of an oppressive way, but the bottom line is we have that calendar in place to help you. We have the late work penalty policy there to help you, to help encourage you to stay on track, to follow our recommendations, because at the end of the day, everything that we're doing, even the way that we've scheduled it out for you, is meant to help you and meant to ensure your success. And that's really all we care about.
Absolutely. And for your resources, you guys, just so here's it again. We made you this video. We are going to talk about this in class. We didn't just make this video because we like each other so much and we love lit review so much that we're like, let's talk about it again.
That's part of it though.
I mean, the liking each other so much, but the liking the lit review so much, I want to talk more about it.
Yeah,
I don't know about that part.
I get it.
But you guys, watch this again. I know it seems like an extra thing that you have to do in an already like overwhelming process of writing this, but it will help you. Use your graphic organizer that we will give you for this lit review, and the graphic organizers you used for your summaries. The rubric, like I said, we make that for you. The 1-page outline on summary that we gave you, I don't remember what color it's on, but all I know is it's on a piece of colored paper and it is beautiful. Follow that outline. We gave you guys a student example as well. Look through that. Remember, you're not following that student example exactly how they're listing it out. No student example is perfect, but you're using it to help your understanding of what it should look like. So use that student example for that purpose alone. And then obviously your due date calendar. I know a lot of you guys put that at the forefront of your binders and you look at it consistently, and you should continue to do that for this process.
All right, so here's the thing. We know that stuff gets busy, right? And as we move further into the term, cool stuff happens, especially for seniors. We have all the fun Halloween stuff, all the fun activities that we have, spirit activities and FAF and all that good stuff. If you are heavily involved in sports or student government or your job, right? Understand that you've got to look ahead. If you know you're going to be busy, don't just decide that you're going to get behind because you don't have time for stuff. You have this assignment ahead of time. You have this lesson ahead of time. If you want to stay on track, and you know you're going to be busy, work ahead. There's no law against writing more of this paper than what is scheduled. There's no law against having it done early so me or Miss Holland can take a look at it before you submit it. Work smarter, not harder, and working harder is definitely necessary when you get behind. So don't allow yourself to get behind. Insist with yourself that you're going to follow this process without ever falling behind, because it's the difference between enjoying it just a little bit or thinking that it's literally the worst thing that has literally ever happened to you. That's the difference between staying on track and getting behind.
And you guys, we have deadlines for this first lit review before fall break, because we know that you need that break as much as we need that break. And if you can stay on track and you can get it submitted on time, and that way you can do your revisions and everything too later on, it gives you that whole fall break to just take a breather from all of this stuff, especially before we jump right into our second lit review. So get it done on time, enjoy your fall break. The same thing will be true for lit review 2. We will have it due before winter break, because we know you guys need to take that time to just enjoy yourself, right? This is your senior year, enjoy your friends, enjoy your family. And we really are serious about that. So we always make due dates before big breaks, but that is contingent on you also following the structure so you can get it done. Don't wait until the last minute. We have broken this up so well that if you follow our structure and you pace yourself with heading 1, heading 2, works cited, intro, conclusion, you should be able to finish this lit review all at once. Honestly, guys, if you go to sit down and write a 6 to 8 page lit review all at once, oh man,
I don't even know.
hate it. You're gonna hate it so much.
I mean,
it's not gonna be that.
Miss Holland and I can do it, but you can't. You understand?
I mean, we've
Not
written a lot of
there yet.
papers in our life.
You're
A
not
lot of
the
papers.
titans. You are not the titans of paper writing that we have become. So don't think that you are. Do not try it last minute, you guys.
Do not.
Mhm.
Do not. That is our final piece of
Thing,
advice.
guys, we believe in you. We have also prepared you. We've done this before. We've seen students do it before. Many students before you have done this. I know it seems daunting. You've probably never written a paper of this length before, but we've got you, and you've got this because we have prepared you every step of the way. Believe in yourself, but also don't get too cocky. We gave you all those resources for a reason. Use them, like read the directions and stuff. You get it.
Read all the directions.
I believe.
We do. We believe in you guys. You
Mhm.
got this. First lit review. You've worked so hard for this. Just have confidence in yourself. Know that you will find success in this. So believe in the process, and we believe in you.
That's right, we do. Okay, bye.
Bye.